Today is the last. We've been doing a series called Going All the Way because it's about God's plan to ensure that relationships go the distance. That's God's design. That's God's purpose. And today we're going to talk about what I kind of warned you about the last couple of weeks. We're going to talk about the subject of sex. Oh my goodness, you're going to talk about that in church? Yes, and here's the point. I want to be tremendously sensitive today because I know this can stir up things. I know it can be difficult at times. And that's what I prayed today, that God would reach you right where you are. And I get it. In advance here, listen to me. You may not agree with me today, and you have the freedom to say, no, I don't agree with you at all. But I ask you to truly listen, because you know what happens? In dialogues, when you already have your mind made up, usually you're already thinking defensively about how to come back from that. I'm asking you to put that aside for just a moment and listen with your heart. And again, if you at the end of the day, you walk away and you say, I don't want that at all, well, that's fine. Thank you for just being here today and listening, okay? But we're going to talk about this end of it. And so let me ask this question as we begin today. How many of you, when you were kids, did your parents ever have the talk with you? You know what I'm talking about? And I had to look it up. I was like, why do they call that about the birds and the bees, okay? But anybody's parents, you ever had that, they had that talk with you? Anybody on that? How about this? If you're a parent in here, okay, and you have young people in your household, have you ever had the talk with your kids? Anybody? Okay. You know, when I was growing up, my mom died when I was 8, a little early to talk about sex at that point, okay? But my dad and I had an estranged relationship, so nobody ever talked to me. So the amount of ignorance I had was massive, because the knowledge I had came from my friends on the street, which we basically exported all of our ignorance to one another. And there's a lot of ignorance about this subject that we talk about it. I remember when I talked to my kids, I had this discussion when my kids were in middle school, okay? Boy, it was awkward, but I really wish I knew then what I know today. So if you're a parent or a grandparent, you can take notes today. Maybe hopefully this will help you, because there's a lot of confusion. And I'll tell you straight up front, okay? Because some of you are looking out there and go like, man, he's old. So what does he got to say about this, okay? Or like, like he's not with the times, he ain't got, or like he's a preacher. What would he know about any of this? Because all we've usually ever heard about church when it comes to the subject of sex, if it's ever even brought up, is no, don't, okay? And so today, I'm going to approach it potentially in a way you don't anticipate or expect. But I will say this, because here's the title of today's message: Designer Sex. And up front, I'm going to tell you this. I'm coming from a Christian perspective. Which some people, like, wait a minute. My teacher in college, they had a degree in this. You ain't got a degree in this. Okay? But here's the point. I believe the Bible is just as relevant today as it ever has been. In fact, I believe that in our culture today, it could truly bring some clarity and some direction to a very confused culture. And so that's where I'm coming from. So I'm telling you up front, I'm coming from a biblical point of view. That's where some people will say, well, I don't agree with that. Okay, but listen, Christians believe, here's how we're going. Christians believe that there is a link between sex and intimacy, and that is the result of a divine design. Okay? It's the result of a divine design, the relationship between sex and intimacy. Because Christians believe that God added the relational dynamic to the sexual equation on purpose for a purpose. In other words, God, think about this with me for a moment. It would take someone with extraordinary relational capacity and imagination to create the relational concept, the relational component of sexuality for humans. Because animals share the procreative reality of sex, but there is something unique, there is something special, that the experience of two individuals in the course of sexual intercourse is by far a relational reality that is reserved for the human race. So I want you to hear this. Sex is a gift given to us by God. Now, just because I say that, listen to me. Can a gift be misused? Can a gift be abused? Yeah, we all know that. You ever watch your kids that you give a Christmas gift to, and the next thing you know, they're like beating somebody up with it? Okay. No, yes, gifts can be used in the wrong way, but that's why I want you to hear and understand today from God's point of view. Because it's important to see this, because here's the truth. Here's where we're going to right away today. Can we have an adult conversation? That's why I kind of warned you, don't bring your kids into this one, okay? Because I'm gonna be really raw and real today, but sensitively, because listen, here's the truth. Sex is more than physical. Sex is more, it's way more than physical. Why? Because you are way more than a body, okay? But here's the point. We live in a Western culture, okay, that has worked hard and tirelessly to export a myth, to sell you on an idea that sex is purely physical. I mean, it's an appetite. And so here's what culture will tell you, okay? Culture will say to you, as long as it's consensual, as long as it's safe, and when they talk about safe, they talk about guarding against STDs and unwanted pregnancy. If you've done that, then go for it. It's kind of like how culture tells you to handle alcohol. Drink responsibly. So when it comes to sex in Western culture, people say, sex responsibly. But here's the point, okay? Sex is far more than physical. And if we're really honest in this room, we all really know that down deep, okay? Because sex is more than that. Sex is a natural appetite, right? But like any appetite, if you feed it, it grows. And unfortunately, it can grow to control you. And that's what people don't want to admit when it comes to some of these things. So in essence, culture says, physically, as long as there are no consequences, in other words, a disease or an unwanted pregnancy, then it's inconsequential. But that's purely not honest, okay? Because they will say to you, this is what culture will say, well, those puritanical ideas, those Victorian ways, that's all outdated. That's just trying to keep you from something that's really good. Just trying to scare you out of it. If it's good, if you have an appetite for it, then you must be meant for this, so just go for it, just do it. That's what culture will tell you. If we're honest, we know that, okay? But there's far more to this than meets the eye. But let me tell you this. Sex isn't just physical. Is it physical? Yes. But can I be honest with you? Okay? You're not an animal. And here's something you may never have thought of. Why are humans the only creation of God that have sex face to face? Probably never thought of that one. Find that on the Animal Planet channel, right? Reality is this, there's something unique. There's something powerful. But here's the point. Do you mind me going here for just a moment? Okay? Sex is far more than physical. Because what's uncomfortably obvious, if we're honest in this place, okay? Any adult that was ever the victim of sexual abuse as a child has immense difficulty getting over it if they ever do. And see here, if it was purely physical, then you say, once the physical side is healed, then just get over it. But just saying that is so insensitive. Just saying that shows how much ignorance somebody might have. Or think about this for a moment. Why are women far more ready to report assault, physical assault, than they are rape? Why is rape so devastating in a woman's life? Again, if you've never been around that situation, you have no clue. I remember years ago counseling a woman who had been raped, and she was taking 8 showers a day. And you're trying to help her to realize, listen, this is not your fault. I don't care what anybody else told you that way. This is not your fault. It's the same thing you try to tell the victims of sexual abuse. But there's something that carries in it because there's more to us than the physical body that we live in. Okay? Think about this for a moment. Talk about this for a second. What about sexual addictions? The thing that's not talked about at all in culture, but is an epidemic that people hide because of the taboo, because of the fear, because of the shame associated around it. People suffer in silence. They're in a prison of guilt and shame. And they're addicted. But they do their best to hide it. The chains of those hands. Because listen to me. People's greatest regrets often involve something that's sexual. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, Pastor Ken, can I meet with you privately? And they open up and say, can I tell you something that I've never told anybody before? 9 out of 10 times, it has something to do with sex. Yeah, because why? That's the thing that nobody talks about. But there's something we know. In fact, why is adultery called unfaithfulness? And why is adultery the one exception Jesus made when talking about the subject of divorce? He said, accepting infidelity, okay? Why? Because it's the breaking of a covenant. The harm, the damage that it brings to a relationship goes so deep. Because why? We know this. Sex is physical, but it's so much more than that. Because you are so much more than that. That's why it's important that we see and understand this. Because you and I must recognize God made sex. Yes, God created it. You hear all of that bad list, and people automatically realize why the church sometimes has not handled this well. Because people think, well, oh my God, it's got to be all evil. Okay? I grew up in the Catholic Church. It was almost a sin if two married people smiled while having sex, okay? But the reality is this. If you weren't Catholic, you don't know where I'm coming from on that. But God made sex on purpose for a purpose. So let's talk about divine design. Because sex, listen to me, sex is more than for having babies. Culture understands this because culture, on the other side of the coin, culture elevates and celebrates the sexual pleasure that comes along with it, correct? I mean, if it wasn't fun, why would people abuse it, right? And it's okay. You can say there's pleasure in that in church, okay? But listen to me, listen. But Christians believe that the significance of sex goes beyond babies and bliss. Listen to this. In Genesis 2:24, it says, that's why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked and felt no shame. The term united there is a direct reference to sex. And in case you are unaware of this, we'll cover it today. Paul made it abundantly clear in the New Testament. That's exactly what God meant. In fact, Jesus weighed in on this. We've used this scripture before in this series, but listen again, Jesus' take on this, because people who say Jesus never spoke about sexuality are either not honest or just ignorant. He did, and he's such a master. He said a lot without having to say a lot, okay? But in Matthew chapter 19, in verse 5, listen to what Jesus said. He said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. He's quoting again from what we read in Genesis. And the two will become one flesh. Now he puts his own take on this. Verse 6. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So when Jesus weighed in on this, he went back to the original design. Okay? And here, according to Jesus, not according to Pastor Ken, okay, according to Jesus, Jesus associated sex with the start of a new permanent family unit. In other words, according to Jesus, sex symbolizes the knitting together of two people to form one new entity. He said they're no longer two, but they are one flesh. One. And why do you think that in Genesis it said immediately after that they were naked and not ashamed? In other words, intimacy. What the heart truly craves and longs for, whether we admit it or not, is to be known, to be fully known and fully loved. And why is it that when it comes to sex that people tend to lie about that the most? But you see, to be fully known and fully loved is the realization that we have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be fearful of, that we can be naked. In other words, we have nothing to hide. There's nothing that we have to hide. So listen to me, listen. God's design for sex was for married people because sex is a physical expression of relational oneness. Permanence. You see, you can divide two back into one, but you can't divide one and find anything that's whole. Now that was the worth of admission today. That's where the heartache, That's where the heartbreak that so many people struggle with. In fact, you know what we end up doing? Because our sexual experiences, when we pretend like they don't really matter, that we go along with culture, said, well, you know, it's inconsequential. We hurt our own heart. We harden our heart. That's why I say the people that are serial daters, especially if it involves physical, are just setting themselves up for divorce, because Jesus said the number one relational problem that people deal with is a hardened heart. And there's no way that you open yourself up to something so intimate and so personal and say you can walk away with it with no consequence. That's just lying to yourself, and that's lying to everything that is true. Because listen to me, can we be honest? You can make babies with a lot of people, okay? You can have sexual pleasure with a lot of people, but you can only be one with one other person. You can only have relational intimacy and oneness with one other person. That's what they never tell you in sex ed class. That's what they never tell you in the situations in culture that you live in. Because God designed that sex was a mirror image of relational permanency, the ability for true intimacy. And that's what God wanted us to experience. Because what the intent of God was is that we would reserve our bodies for that special someone. So why? That at a wedding, two people could turn to one another and say, I have reserved this gift for you. You see, the wedding night and the honeymoon was the design to unwrap the gift, if you know what I mean. But here's the point. See, it loses significance if the person that you're now going to live in total unity with, you say, I waited all my life for you, if you didn't. Do you realize the aspect of it? See, that's what God wants us to understand. Because listen, what's the Creator's purpose for sex? Well, the first one, here's where my Catholic brothers got it right. And it's amazing because I talked to some of my other pastor friends, and it amazes me how so many of them are like, got this totally off. You have to go in order, okay? What's the primary purpose? Because God had a prime. If you focus on secondaries, you'll get confused, and you'll become as confused and deranged as culture sometimes. Listen to me. The primary purpose of sex, God designed it for this. It's what? Reproducing humans. The first words that humans heard. Now listen to me. God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And so God created, listen to me. He created, if you read it, He created the male and female. In other words, it takes the man and the woman to equal the image of God. Probably never heard that one before. But let me tell you, it's in the Bible. Read it for yourself. Here's the point. Reproducing humans, God said this is the first thing humans heard. Okay? When God made the human being, here's what the humans heard first from God. Genesis 1:28. God blessed them. Notice He said He blessed them. He didn't curse them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Let me ask you a question. How can you do that without sex? So sex was on God's mind in the creative process, right? He said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. You see, if we stress this more in church, the primary purpose of sex, it would undo a lot of the confusion that people have in culture today. Because from God's point of view, He gave the uniqueness to humankind, the ability to create other humans. Because humans have tremendous worth to Almighty God. And God entrusted this to humans. In fact, listen to me. Angels were not given that responsibility or that ability to in God's endorsed reality. Okay? God didn't say angels create other angels. But He said humans create other humans, which is why the act of marriage is so sacred and so holy. But listen to me. If we would actually understand this, that God intended that the act of sex could bring life, it would answer so many questions that people ask about sexuality today. Because biology answers that. You don't even have to go to the Bible for it. Because when a man and a woman come together, see, God's plan for sexuality was that two people in the permanence of a marital covenant experience something that has the ability to bring life into the earth. Doesn't mean that but there's the point of not making it insignificant. Recognize the significance of the ability that it has to create. The reality is this: when two come together that way, it just goes together. It fits. You don't know what I'm talking about, right? When you're doing a puzzle, okay? Because when you put the puzzle together, let me tell you this: what you get is the image of God. I told you this last week. A godly home, when a man and a woman outlove one another, outserve one another, and bring children into the world, that everybody in the family learns to submit to one another, love one another, work together, then in that environment, humans, because this is what animals never experience. They don't form families. They don't have lifelong unions. They don't create others in the image of God. But when it is, because listen to me, a family home is a reflection of heaven on earth. And I say this to people because listen, a godly marriage, or I should say this way, marriage can be the closest thing that people experience on earth to heaven. Okay? And here's the point, how you go about it. Marriage can be the closest thing to heaven on earth or hell on earth, depending on how you go about it. And that's what see, when you talk about puzzle pieces, do you ever see somebody building a puzzle, get frustrated, and they try to jam two pieces together that don't really go together? I mean, you might try to get them to go together, but everybody can look at it and go, that's just not right. Well, God designed it. So you're trying to tell me, listen to me. People will say to me right now, Pastor Ken, if somebody is of the same sex, can they not love somebody of the same sex? Of course they can. Can two people that are of the same sex be committed to one another, take care of one another? Of course they can. The issue is sex. And in culture, what we have come to recognize is we call sex love. And they are not one and the same. So Pastor Ken, why would you say two people of the same sex are not to have sex? Because it doesn't bring life. Not a part of the Creator's intention. Now, I know that's sensitive and I don't want to offend anybody, but are we willing to embrace truth? Here's the point. Because the second reality, this is where people get confused. The second reality, see, my Catholic brothers got it right on the first one, but this one, they never talk about this one. There's a second reason God created sex, and that's the bonding of the marital covenant. Okay? Babies were not God's only design for it. Because look again, in Genesis 2:24 said, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. The power of bonding. Because here's the point. When two people experience sex, God created this euphoric. I mean, the amount of chemicals, the engineering of the human body that makes it respond. Why do you think that people go so crazy over it, right? Okay? But here's the point. When two are in a marital union and they experience this uniquely, that nobody knows you like I do and nobody knows me like you do, there's something so powerful that it brings a couple together. It's not what the relationship's based on, but it is the joy and excitement. Yes, if all of you think that God's hung up, that God's approved, that God's not for sex, no, God absolutely is for sex, but more importantly, God's for you. This is what God designed. Listen to me. The sexual union in marriage was to be like this. Anybody know what this is? This is called duct tape, okay? And we all know this about duct tape, is that when you want to fix anything in your house, okay, you just pull out the duct tape because it'll hold anything together, right? We all do it. It's like it's designed for duct work, but listen, we use it for all sorts of stuff, if we're honest, right? So please don't get offended at my illustrations, but look it. God designed the sexual relationship would be the sticky part that holds them together, okay? It's designed to be permanent. It's designed to hold because two people, that when they get excited, no matter how difficult life can be, when you start thinking about your spouse and the enjoyment that sex brings, you want to get home. Playing Xbox with the guys, there's nothing that compares to it. But here's the problem. If what's meant for permanency gets ripped off. Anybody ever you get your blood drawn, right? And they put the tape on you? It hurts when you rip it off, right? And that's the problem. Sexual experiences outside of what God designed for permanence, as in the words of Taylor Swift, can leave a nasty scar. And all the adults that don't know what I'm talking about, forget it. Just look forward anyway. But here's the point. You can't see this, but I can tell you the truth. Based on the material of my shirt, when I rip this off, there's little pieces of it still on this tape. And that's the thing that nobody ever tells you about, is you carry with you things. We hurt ourselves when we separate sex from sexual relationship. See, God designed it as a relationship, not just as an experience. But here's the problem. If you go around and if you listen to the world standards and you just keep doing this, you know what happens over time? The stickiness don't stick that much no more. And that's the problem we're having in culture today. People are not honest about that aspect of it. Because sex life is unique. It's meant to be permanent. Do you ever wonder why when you read the Bible it says Adam knew Eve and she conceived? It's like, what'd they know? What you're supposed to discover with only the two of you. Okay, sex is not like learning to play the piano. You don't need an instructor. God intended the two people would learn together because there's a knowledge that they gain about one another that's unique, that's distinct, that's important, it's personal, it's intimate. It's something that nobody else knows about you, and something that somebody knows about me that no one else knows about me but you. That's what God intended. That's what he designed it for. So listen to me, because why? You think God's a prude? Listen to this scripture. I love it. In Proverbs 5 and verse 15, Proverbs is the wisdom book, okay? But man, if you're not a Bible reader, maybe you've never come across this. I love Bible language. Listen to this. God's so cool. In Proverbs 5 and verse 15, it says, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. That's how God describes sex, okay? He said, should your springs overflow in the streets or your streams of water in the public squares? Do you need any explanation about that? He said, may your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice with the wife of your youth. I love God's commentary because the male sexual experience, oh my God, you can't express it any more clearly than that without being, too abrupt. But listen, God said that a man in a sexual experience is like a fountain. In other words, it's water under pressure. You know, the old expression they used to say, a man, when it comes to sex, a man is like a microwave and a woman is like a crock pot. You got to learn how to cook the right dishes in your household, okay? Because God said, may your fountain be blessed and may you rejoice with the wife of your youth. A loving doe and a graceful deer, may her, what? That's in the Bible? Yeah, y'all reading it on the screen going, yeah, it's in there. He goes, a loving doe and a graceful deer, may her breasts satisfy you always. And may you be intoxicated with her love. I told you, sex in the gain of marriage, it's intoxicating. No drug can compare to it. It's amazing. And it ain't a sin to enjoy it. Okay? God said this. I mean, but then he says, but my son. He said, why my son? Be intoxicated with another man's wife. Why embrace the bosom of a wayward woman? For all the way, listen, you can fool your spouse. You can fool your friends. You may be able to pull the wool over other people's eyes, but this next verse needs to be clear. It says, but listen, for your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines our paths. So again, God's not against sex. God is for you, but God created sex on purpose for a purpose, that you could experience it without having to hide it, without having to feel guilty, without having to feel shame, without having to feel remorse, without having to have regrets. No, God designed it for the bond of permanency and intimacy, because that's what the intent is. You see, there's a whole book of the Bible dedicated to the physical relationship between a man and a woman. It's what all the middle schoolers back in the day used to sneak into the synagogue and take the book of Song of Solomon and go in the woods and read it to each other. They're like, why is it called a song? I don't know, let's get the melody. Let's go. But you know what I'm saying? Because there's a whole book. If God was against it, why would the Spirit have inspired this? But listen to me. God's plan for sexual expression is the permanency of the union of two covenant partners made one. That's the intent. See, sexual decisions, listen to me. Sexual decisions before marriage impacts sexual experiences afterwards. That's what no one has told you. Just like learning to play an instrument, it's designed not to be learned in an environment of others being an instructor. It's learned for two people to learn together, each other. Because our capacity for relational intimacy is linked to our sexual experiences. By divorcing sexual experiences from relational permanency, we are damaging the potential for intimacy and true sexual fulfillment. You see, Paul was given this task to bring this ideology, to bring this viewpoint into a pagan world. It's one thing for the apostles who were predominantly Jewish, raised in a Jewish culture, they kind of understood much of this already. But Paul had this assignment. Now go into a world, and it's kind of like the world we live in today. And where we're heading if we don't pump the brakes as a society. Because in Paul's day, there's so much in common, because we've gone back into paganism in this way. Because in Paul's day, pretty much almost anything went in sexuality, okay? But there were things that yet were legal in his day that weren't legal in our day. Prostitution was legal. In fact, what's interesting when you go back and look in history is that in pagan cultures, sex and religion were generally linked together. I don't know, maybe somebody thought about an idea of how to get guys to go to church. I don't know, but listen to me. But Paul had to go to Corinth and tell about this. And pedophilia was legal in his day. The things that weren't legal is you couldn't have sex with another man's wife, and you couldn't have sex with another person's slave. But you can do whatever you want to your own slaves. See, this was the culture that Paul had to do. So Corinth was one of the most pagan, most carnal cultures. And Paul writes something so amazing, because back in that day, Corinth was like the Las Vegas of the ancient world. Okay? And here's what Paul wrote. He says this in 1 Corinthians 6:15. Do you not know? There are many things we know intuitively. We just deceive ourselves. And that's a decision we make. Because there's things we know are not right. But we are constantly, as humans, making excuses, because we have this tremendous capacity as humans to justify anything we desperately want. Okay? Because I tell people all the time, what is sin? Sin is simply this. When you know what's right and you know what's wrong, you choose to do what's wrong anyway, and you have all your excuses why you're justified doing it. Okay? He said, do you not know that your bodies are the members of Christ himself? Shall I take the members of Christ and unite them with the prostitute? Never. But look at this. He says, do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? You're like, wait a minute. We're just having sex. Who said anything about bonding? Who said anything about permanency? Who said anything about any of that? See, you can fool yourself. You can rebel against or be ignorant of God's design and God's will, but listen to me, it doesn't circumvent the experiences and what it does to us. Because look it, he said, do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one body, is one with her in body? For he said, the two will be one flesh. That's why I told you that was a direct reference to sex. But whoever is united with the Lord is one spirit with him. You see, sex outside of a committed relationship has relational implications. The idea of being one flesh, God designed. But when you abuse it, listen to me, you hurt yourself. See, culture will tell you, well, if nobody's hurt, what's wrong with it? But what you're not honest about is we hurt ourselves. Okay? Because the stickiness that God designed can be lost. And listen to me. If sex is how you evaluate a relationship, then the opportunity of a relationship going all the way, going the distance, is zero. Because when things get bad, you're like, man, I got the wrong partner. I just need another. Without the understanding of the permanency that this was intended by God for it to experience in this end, see, what you do is that you separate, you lose the significance of what sex was designed for. And so Paul gives us the reason why. And guess what? Paul doesn't give you the school teacher version of sex ed. Oh, no, because you want to avoid STDs. No, you want to avoid unavoidable pregnancies. No, Paul goes deeper. And listen to what Paul says to us. Why? Because in verse 18, still in the same discussion to these people, he said, flee sexual immorality. If you grew up in church, maybe that's all you ever heard. Run! Okay? He said, flee sexual immorality. Why, Paul? Why? All of the sins a person commits are outside the body. But whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Sex sins are in a category all by themselves. Why? Because listen to me. When you sin sexually, you hurt yourself. Now we know that intuitively. Because again, if you've been involved in a relationship and it went bad, or as Taylor said, went down in flames, you know that you carry the scars and the hardening of your own heart. See, ignoring or rebelling against God's relational purpose for sex hurts us. It's more than physical, because why? Sex involves all of us, spirit, soul, and body. It involves the entirety of the human experience. That's why culture lies to you when it says it's purely physical. It is physical, but it's more than that. And we know that intuitively. We know that down deep. We're just sometimes not willing to face the truth. But here, I want you to know this. If you embrace truth, you can find freedom. Because sex sins are what people are most tempted to hide. And when you hide them, you tend to smuggle them into your future. See, sex sins, listen to me. Sex sins are not unforgivable. There's a story in the New Testament. A woman was caught in the act of adultery. She was brought to Jesus, right? When Jesus had finished his discourse, all of her accusers were gone. And he looked up and said, where are those who condemn you? She says, none are here. He says, I don't condemn you either. Go and leave your life of sin. See, grace and truth go together. Reality is this: sex sins are not unforgivable. In other words, having sex outside of marriage won't usher you into hell, but it could make your life a living hell. That's what nobody tends to tell you. Okay? And so in essence, listen to me. The only safe sex is marital sex. The only safe sex is marital sex. See, when you downplay that end of it, when you do it, listen to me. When you downplay that end of it, you divorce something, because listen to me. If you divorce sex from relationship, and listen, can I talk to all the guys for a moment? If you tell a woman, I love you, to get what you want, you betray your own heart, and you don't even know what love truly is. That's the problem is that we have. But here's the last thing I'll tell you. Listen to me. This is a phenomena, okay? Therapists and psychologists have a name for it. It's way above my pay grade, but I've seen it. And here's the point, okay? It's so prevalent in culture today. And that's women who are sexually active before marriage, after a time in marriage, many times shut down. It's like a switch gets turned off. They're not interested in sex at all. And when they finally, if they ever go to a counselor, here's what they usually say. These are the excuses that they'll bring. Well, he's too fat. That's all he wants. That's all he thinks about. I feel pressured. I don't respect him. But down deep, there's something more, something greater going on. Because the guy's like, listen, When we were dating, she was like an animal. She couldn't keep her hands off me. And now she doesn't want me at all. She keeps thwarting all of my advances. She tells me I have a headache. And I'm like, babe, I'm not even going to touch your head. But the problem is... you got to cut the tension some way. Listen. This is what I want you to know. Listen to me carefully. That purity paves the way for intimacy. Purity paves the way for intimacy. God's not a prude. God created sex. God is for sex. But more importantly, God is for you. He created us for intimacy. Listen to what it says in Hebrews 13 again. It says, marriage should be honored by who? By all. And the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral. Listen. Sex is significant when it's exclusive. We all know that. Listen to me. It should be honored by everybody, because if sex is casual, if sex is purely an appetite, it loses its significance. So listen to me. Romance is fueled by exclusivity. We all know that. Think about the romantic songs. I don't know, I have a bunch in my playlist for my wife. But never is one of them in there going, most of me wants all of you, all your curves and all your edges. No, John Regis didn't write that, okay? You're the only one, or maybe in my 30s, you're the only one. No, we sing songs like, man, nobody else is like you. I swear. Yeah, you'll know my Tennessee whiskey. Yeah. Sorry. Listen, we know this because why? Romance is fueled by exclusivity. Practice does not make perfect. I don't care what anybody tells you. Sex with multiple partners diminishes the potential of exclusivity and the potential for intimacy. And that's why it's important to realize that when you undermine that, you undermine romance and what God wanted. What we desperately say we want. You may not admit it, especially if you're a guy. Guys will look at it and they'll roll their eyes and go, okay, I'm in my 20s. I don't want romance. Really, Pastor Ken, I just want sex. And so I expected what you were going to say today. It's okay. I'm glad you're here. I just want you to think about it. Because here's at the end of the day. Romance is fueled by exclusivity. You and I need to realize that practice before marriage, practice before that one and only thing, may enhance the action, but it'll never enhance the relationship. It'll do just the opposite. Because romance and intimacy are fueled by exclusivity. So here's where I want to end today. What story do you want to tell? See, I don't want you to sit here today and feel condemned. Feel like, oh my God, why did I come today? I know he's going to talk about sex, but come on. Here's the point. With God, there is forgiveness. There is restoration. There is the ability. Here's the point. Listen to me carefully. You have a choice today. You came here and you could do this. You could come here and say, listen, I listened to that dude. He's old. He's religious. I don't believe that. And you walk away and keep doing whatever you want to do with whoever you want to do it and go your own way. That could be your story. But today, there may be some of you that go, you know what? He's got a point. Down deep, I know there's truth in that. And Jesus made this promise. If you embrace truth, you'll find freedom, not condemnation. That's what I want you to hear today. Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn you. Jesus came to set you free. But as long as you lie to yourself, as long as you sweep this under the rug, as long as you have all these skeletons in your closet and you don't deal with it, then you won't get free from it. And whatever you hide in your past, you smuggle into your future. And it shows up in places you wish it never did. And that's what I want you to hear today. So listen to me. If you're in a relationship right now and you're having sex and you're not married, stop. Like, what? Yeah, wait. Determine today to give it to God. And believe that God can restore. God can redeem. God can make all things new. Because if you embrace truth, Jesus said, I came to heal the brokenhearted. In other words, be honest about the pain that you've experienced, that you've numbed, that you've lied to yourself and say, it doesn't matter because you think about it more than you're ever honest with yourself or anybody else. You know the pain that it brought and the emptiness that you felt when you were involved and you ripped it apart. A part of you is there. But Jesus knows where the parts of your life are. And the beautiful thing about him, when you come to him, when you're honest, when you're willing, because here's the story you can tell. I went and listened to that dude. He was a little over the top, okay? But you know what? I made a decision. And I decided I'm going to start again. I'm going to give this totally to God. I'm going to stop playing games. I'm going to stop pretending by coming to church and putting on church faith and living any way I want, Monday through Saturday night, and then take the spiritual loophole of confessing my sins Saturday night, emptying my sin bucket so I can come Sunday morning, be with God, and then go do whatever I want to do. That's what I'm asking you, to stop playing the game. To know, and if you're married, maybe for some of you that are married, it's being honest about where your heart has been. Being honest to work through the difficulties. Being honest that if you've been shut down and if you haven't been enjoying a sexual union, then that's not right. God intended that your marriage be the unique and only place where the joy of what he created is experienced. But if you're dealing with a guilty past, if you're dealing with the shame of where you've been, then today I want you to be free. I want you to find the place to know that Jesus didn't come to condemn you, that you can find the freedom, because what God's designed for your relationship is to be naked and unashamed, to just give it all to him. Let it all get out. Like any wound, let the infection be moved away so that it can heal as God intended. If you're living together and you ain't married, move out. But the bills are less, Pastor Ken. Yeah, the lies will continue to hurt you. And that's what I want for you. Because if that's the one you're supposed to be with, then start now by making sex exclusive, making sex significant, by saving it for when God designed it, because it's supposed to be a symbol of permanence. And too many people who live together, they act like everything is permanent, and it ain't permanent at all. It ain't. There has to be a point at which you're willing to deal with your fears, your insecurities, your past hurts. You know, too many of you sing that old song that Meatloaf used to sing. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, you don't have to look it up on me. But listen, too many, you carry your hurts, you carry your insecurities, you carry all of this pain. And the Lord is saying, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Don't try to pretend any longer. And be honest about my own desires, my own selfishness. And say, God, because that's part of following Jesus, is to lay my world aside, lay my ideas aside and say, Jesus, I believe you are who you say you are. And following you is the best path forward.